Hello and welcome to the Dailies. The postponement of the Budapest summit, seen as a setback to ongoing diplomatic efforts, dominated international headlines today. Simultaneously, escalating developments in the Middle East drew significant global attention, reflecting the region's fragile geopolitical landscape. In the United States, domestic news was led by Paul Ingrassia's withdrawal from his nomination following the emergence of racist texts, and growing controversy over the White House renovations, which critics say blur the line between personal branding and public office. Most international media reported on what many called a sudden turn in Trump's Ukraine policy. Press portrayed it as a major diplomatic setback, reflecting stalled US-Russia talks on Ukraine. Coverage highlighted Putin's refusal of a ceasefire and Trump's reluctance to hold a wasted meeting. Reports also underscored confusion and mixed signals, with Washington downplaying the event while Hungary claimed preparations were ongoing. The Wall Street Journal captures this sharp turn just days after announcing a Budapest summit with Vladimir Putin, saying Trump now declares the meeting a waste of time, signaling frustration with Moscow's unyielding stance. The report highlights a call between Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov, confirmed Russia's insistence on full control of the Donbas region, echoing the failed Alaska talks 2 months ago. The piece contends that Trump's shifting tone reflects mounting impatience as he weighs tougher measures, including advanced US weapon deliveries to Ukraine, while both sides also hint at future diplomacy. Now, the report underscores the stark gap between US and Russian positions, suggesting meaningful progress remains elusive, despite Trump's desire to end the war quickly. The Washington Post commented on this in its editorial, framing the collapse of the planned Vladimir Putin-Donald Trump summit in Budapest as proof that sustained pressure works on the Kremlin. The article traces the breakdown to Moscow's refusal to accept a ceasefire, revealing Russia's unchanged aim, denying Ukraine real sovereignty and security guarantees. It underscores how Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil infrastructure, aided by US intelligence, have increased pressure on Putin, especially amid fears of US Tomahawk missile deliveries. Vladimir Zelensky framed the summit's collapse as further evidence that Russian diplomacy responds only to credible threats. The piece concludes that economic and military pressure, including renewed sanctions and advanced weapons, may be the most effective path to forcing Moscow towards serious negotiations. Russian media, on the other hand, framed the summit delay as strategic, not a setback, stressing no official date had been set. Outlets portrayed Moscow as asserting control and refusing to rush into talks on unfavorable terms. Analysts emphasize that Western expectations were premature, reinforcing the image of Russia holding diplomatic leverage. Russian daily newspaper Kommersant offers a restrained yet pointed analysis of the uncertainty surrounding the planned summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. The piece stresses that the delay is rooted in geopolitical deadlock rather than diplomatic failure. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, or his rejection of a ceasefire along the Ukrainian contact line, illustrates the deep divide between Washington and Moscow. Political analysts also note serious reasons for the summit's postponement, highlighting the lack of progress on core security issues. Kommersant frames the situation as a calculated and controlled, or as being indeed calculated and controlled, reflecting a broader Russian narrative that views delay as strategic positioning and not retreat. Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir and the new allegations against Prince Andrew are still capturing the headlines in the UK. A bombshell investigation by the Times reveals that Prince Andrew, Duke of York, has lived rent-free for most of his adult life through Crown Estate properties and royal arrangements. The investigation reveals documents show he paid no rent on Sunninghill Park, a wedding gift from Queen Elizabeth II, and secured a lease at Royal Lodge that grants him rent-free residence until 2078, after paying an initial £1 million and covering refurbishments. Now, the Sunninghill property was later sold in a controversial £15 million deal to a Kazakh billionaire, with renewed also scrutiny following recent scandals. Politicians are urging Andrew to vacate Royal Lodge and live privately, citing public frustration over taxpayer-linked royal privileges. This investigation intensifies pressure on Prince Andrew amid calls to strip him of his remaining royal titles. UK and international media continue to cover developments in the Middle East as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets Vice President J.D. Vance in Jerusalem today. The Independent reported today on the UK Ministry of Defence confirming the deployment of a senior commander and a small team of British troops to support enforcement of the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, and that is part of a US-led initiative. The report explains that Defence Secretary John Healey announced that a two-star British Army officer will serve as Deputy Commander of the Civil Military Coordination Centre, which coordinates international efforts to stabilise the truce. The move comes amid growing concerns that the ceasefire, central to Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan, could indeed collapse following renewed Israeli strikes. The US is contributing up to 200 troops to the mission, and talks are ongoing with other countries to join. The piece notes Washington and its allies aim to transition Gaza from conflict to post-war stabilization, though the legal and also operational framework remains unsettled. Arab media kept an eye on the evolving conditions of the ceasefire in the Middle East. Al-Sharq al-Awsat examines how a series of targeted Israeli airstrikes has heightened Hamas's fears that Gaza may face a Lebanon scenario where assassinations continue despite a ceasefire. The report highlights that over 3 days, Israeli drones killed 5 senior members of Izz-ad-Din al-Qassam brigade and critically injured another, striking in Jabalia and Az-Zawaida area. The report explains that Hamas sources view the strikes as a calculated strategy to maintain long-term Israeli control and to prevent the group from rebuilding militarily, mirroring tactics used against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The piece concludes that although Hamas insists on upholding the truce, officials warn continued violations could indeed trigger brief clashes. And as both Israel and Hamas accuse each other of ceasefire violations, Iran Yashiv wrote in Haaretz, arguing that the greatest challenge to Donald Trump's Gaza peace framework is not Hamas or regional politics, but it's Benjamin Netanyahu. The author contends that while the recent hostage release marks a turning point, Netanyahu's nationalist Jewish Sparta vision threatens to derail fragile diplomatic progress. The article contends that despite pressure from Trump and his envoy Jared Kushner, Netanyahu remains focused on consolidating power, potentially through delaying tactics, provocations, or even triggering a security crisis. The piece frames Trump as the only figure capable of restraining Netanyahu, noting that sustained U.S. pressure could make or break the deal. It ends with a warning: Israel's liberal public must stay vigilant, as this moment is only a temporary pause in Netanyahu's long-term strategy. American media focused on the abrupt collapse of Paul Ingrassia's nomination to lead the U.S. Office of Special Counsel after the exposure of racist text messages. The Politico report highlights the immediate backlash within the Republican Party. The messages it sparked also within key senators, including John Thune and Rick Scott, withdrawing support. The piece highlights how Ingrassia's existing controversies, including past ties to extremist figures and a harassment allegation, amplified the scandal's impact. It also frames his withdrawal as both politically inevitable and shows the heightened scrutiny facing political appointees. And we'll end with another controversy that grabbed the attention in the US, which centers on the privately funded, extravagant renovations in the White House. Critics say they blur the line between personal branding and public office, while others argue they raise ethical concerns and politicize a national institution. Newsweek reported on the White House's national reaction to the outrage over East Wing demolition for Trump's ballroom. And the report describes the White House's sharply worded response in which it dismissed criticism as manufactured outrage. The piece notes the administration also framed the project as a historic and necessary upgrade, aligning it with a long tradition of presidential renovations. It also highlights the critics view it as an unnecessary and politicized transformation of the executive residence. The ballroom's private funding has also stirred debate over influence and optics. And the piece concludes the project reflects Trump's broader aesthetic ambitions with its planned opulent design and the 999-person capacity. Approval for the vertical construction remains pending amid a government shutdown, but the White House has pledged to move forward and keep the public informed. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.